People think that Formula One drivers are some of the best in the world, but sometimes emotions get too high and adrenaline pumps too hard, leading to mistakes on the track. F1 drivers should be given a break, since the cars they drive can go over 200 miles per hour and can only be stopped by the brakes and the heat in the tires. It also means that in addition to their skill behind the wheel, they must be very fit and have a lot of focus. But when trying to get ahead, some drivers let their competitiveness get the best of them and do dangerous things to get ahead of their rivals, sometimes with disastrous results. Most of the current F1 drivers are good, like Lewis Hamilton, who has won the title 7 times, and Max Verstappen, whoever wins in 2021. They also get to use a more forgiving system for giving penalty points. If they get more than 12 in a year, they have to sit out one race. Lando Norris almost had to do that last season before his record was wiped clean. But the same can't be said for these speed freaks who went too far with their actions on the track and got banned from racing as a result. As an honorable mention, if there's anything honorable about anybody on this list, we have Anthony Kumpen, an FIA GT1 driver and a champion twice in the NASCAR Whelen Euro Series Elite 1 Championship. Kumpen had a bad 2018. After the 2018 24 Hours of Zolder race, he was found to have used amphetamines. Right away, he was banned from competing again. In court, it got messy because Kumpen said he was still getting better from injuries he got in a crash. Then he was fined €2,000 and told he couldn't race for 4 years. In his early years in Formula One, Michael Schumacher was banned for a race with Benetton. When people think of Formula One, they usually think of one of the greatest people of all time, and Schumacher fits the bill as the second most successful driver in the history of the sport.
If anyone would have asked me how much I would bet on this, I wouldn't have even bet a penny on it. We have not got a present from anyone. I just pushed it to the victory, and the car has been superb, especially at the beginning, and I was able to do the job.
But the German's strong will made him a fierce competitor. Because of this, he often walked the line between right and wrong and ended up breaking the law. In his early years, the former Ferrari star drove for Benetton, and at the 1994 British Grand Prix, he broke one of F1's rules. Schumacher served his time penalty longer than was allowed, so he got a black flag. After being kicked out of the race, he ignored the order to go back to the pits. At the Belgian Grand Prix, his team protested against his 2-race ban. In a strange turn of events, the German was also kicked out of the race at Spa-Francorchamps. No other driver can say they were as good as Romain Grosjean in F1. After his scary moments in the cockpit, the 35-year-old driver is just happy to be able to race in the IndyCar series. Grosjean has already lost his seat with Haas in F1 before his scary accident at 160 miles per hour at the 2020 Bahrain Grand Prix, which burned his hands so badly that he's still getting better.
Well, I've been through a lot in the last 6 months, but from the crash to my rehab to getting back behind my simulator first of all, and then a racing wheel in IndyCar to pole position and podium in Indy GP. So it's been a cool journey. And I'm excited about my time in the US and really enjoying it.
After his first major accident at the 2012 Belgian Grand Prix, though, that was not the only thing that made him wince. Grosjean, who was driving for Lotus Renault at the time, and Hamilton were racing at the front of the grid. Grosjean hit Hamilton, which caused a huge pileup of cars behind him. Grosjean's car seemed to defy the laws of physics when it lifted off of the ground and flew across Fernando Alonso's Ferrari, missing the 2-time champion's head by a small amount. The FIA said he was at fault and banned him from one race because he damaged the cars of Lewis Hamilton and Kamui Kobayashi. During the 1994 season, Mika Hakkinen of McLaren was punished by the FIA for the same kind of mistake that caused the penalty point system to be put in place. The Finn got a suspended ban for the next 3 races after he collided with the Brazilian Rubens Barrichello during the British Grand Prix. He still got on the podium, though. Hakkinen had to miss a race, though, after he caused a more serious accident at Hockenheim that caused several cars to crash and leave the race.
Damage. Oh, and another much bigger accident. That's Hakkinen. Hakkinen, and a back marker spun in front of him. I hope he's going to be all right. That was a big impact coming out of the bomb hole. Yes, we see him crawling out there from his inverted car. Incredibly strong, these cars.
Because his previous ban had been put on hold but was still in effect, Hakkinen's latest crash made the ban take effect. So he missed the Italian Grand Prix. Hakkinen sat out of that race, so Felipe Alio took his place. After that incident, he never missed another race because he was suspended again. Massa is the only other driver since the turn of the century who has been forced to sit out a race because of a race suspension. Massa raced for Sauber, Williams, and Ferrari during his career. He was best known for his heartbreaking 2008 when Hamilton beat him to the championship on the last lap. Before that, the fiery Brazilian made a name for himself with some memorable races. Unfortunately, he would rather forget the 2002 Italian Grand Prix in Indianapolis. Massa got a 10-place grid penalty for the next race because he caused a crash by running into Pedro Della Rosa at Monza. This caused a bunch of cars to crash into each other, but even though he was at fault, the FIA only punished the driver, not the car. This was a strange decision, so his team at the time, Sauber, decided to take him out of the race and put Heinz-Harald Frentzen in his place. That would protect Sauber's position in the Constructors' Championship, since Frentzen was able to qualify for the race without a penalty. But the FIA learned from their mistake and made sure that teams couldn't use the loophole again in the future. Even the great Nigel Mansell is capable of making a terrible mistake that he brought on himself.
Pointed to be 12th on the grid, but then very pleased because I actually qualified on race tyres. We had a big problem on qualifiers, so at least we were in good shape for the race day, which is obviously the most important thing.
The Briton is one of the few drivers to have raced for Williams, McLaren, and Ferrari. He's been out of racing since 1995, when he put away his gloves for good. At the Portuguese Grand Prix in 1989, he got into trouble because he was racing for the second team. The stewards gave Mansell a black flag after he locked up his brakes in the pits and had to drive around his team's mechanics. Even though he was disqualified and told to leave the race, he kept going. He then crashed into Ayrton Senna, which forced both of them to leave the race. Mansell was not allowed to race in the next race in Jerez, Spain, because he did things that were dangerous and stupid. Eddie Irvine learned the hard way in 1994 that when the FIA gives a punishment, drivers can't protest or argue against it. In the case of the Irishman, he didn't seem to know that the sport's governing body had the power to make the ban longer. And that's what happened when his case was decided after a bad crash. At the time, Irvine was driving for the Jordan team. He crashed into both Verstappen and Brundle, and the FIA gave him a one-race suspension. His team filed an appeal because they thought they had a good reason for the sentence to be lessened and the $10,000 fine to be dropped. But the ban was extended to 3 races, which meant that Aguri Suzuki and Andrea De Cesaris would have to drive for the team in the next 3 races.